السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we would like to discuss a very, very important verse of the Quran. It is the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala which begins with Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. This verse of the Quran is a very particular parable of the interaction between the revelation of Allah, the Quran, and the heart of the believer. When these two interact, this verse is a parable of that interaction. Specifically, we will be discussing this verse. Generally, we will be discussing the importance of the Quran in the human being's life. Unfortunately, we live in perhaps the most literate era in human history. This is one of the signs of the hour. The Prophet ﷺ prophesied, and I hope that I don't come off as intense, right? I'm a little bit intense because, I'm new here and I don't know anybody and so forth, so I'm not a bad guy, right? So, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari that one of the signs of the hour is fushu al-qalam, that the pen will become widespread. The pen here is denoting literacy, that people will be very literate, and this is phenomenal. This is something new to the human existence. Most of the time it was the intellectuals and the elitists that were able to read and write and were literate. Most of the people and the common folk didn't need to know how to read and write. This was only for, the high class, the elites. But the fact that we now have transitioned into a time when it is almost unheard of that somebody is illiterate. This in itself should mean that our time is the most knowledgeable of times. But unfortunately, it's exactly the opposite, paradoxically. Paradoxically, we all know how to read, but those of us who do know how to read, we either don't, or we choose to read nonsense and garbage. And most of what we read is in itself inconsequential. And so, it is amazing that the Muslims, they are at their most, there are the most amount of Muslims at one time on earth living that we've ever seen, and the highest rate of literacy amongst Muslims, even in poor countries and so forth, yet we are in surprisingly, paradoxically, one of the most darkest eras in the Muslim world has ever seen. Our scholarship is very weak. Muslims' general knowledge of the Book of Allah is becoming more and more obsolete, to the point that for an individual to have read the entire Quran, or for an individual to have a daily routine in reading and reflecting on the Quran, or knowing some of the meanings of the Quran, or pondering upon and reflecting upon some of its verses, this is something very rare. And we've gotten this attitude now that the Quran is, just for scholars. The Quran is just for, certain kinds of people. It's not for everyone. I don't have to. Yet the individual without the Quran has not really become a human being as Allah intended when creating him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, describing himself, Ar-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, Khalaqa al-Insan. Notice here how Allah describes himself as Ar-Rahman. Then he mentions the Quran. Allama al-Quran, taught the Quran. Khalaqa al-Insan. After that comes the creation of the human being. As if to say that the human being has not fully been created and reached his full potential until he has learned the Quran. Until he has been taught the Quran by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no way for a person to reach his full potential without the Quran. And this is why this ummah, the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the greatest of all nations. And this is the nation, as is in the narrations, this is the nation which will testify against all other nations using the Quran. And that is because all of the relevant knowledge and experiences of prior revelation and nations is found in the Quran. We have it all. Allah described the Quran as Al-Kitab, the book. And what's meant by the book here is the epitome of the revelations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He described the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as يتلو صحفا مطهرة فيها كتب قيمة, that he recites pages that are purified. In these pages, in these scrolls, in these revelations, he is reciting it. These revelations, these pages contain very lofty books, referring to all of the previous books that have come before. And so it's mentioned that all of the relevant meanings of the previous revelations of the prophets are found in the Quran. And yet, in spite of all of this, there is a huge chasm between ourselves and the Quran. It's something that doesn't occupy a lot of our time. And this is very unfortunate. The Quran is an intrusive text that changes a person whether he likes it or not merely by exposure. Merely being exposed to the Quran will change a person whether he likes it or not, whether he is accepting of this change or not. This is how powerful the Quran is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described his revelations, described the legislations as Sibghat Allah. In Surah Al-Baqarah he described it as Sibghat Allah. Sibgha here is dye. Dye that you dye your clothing with, or you dye something with, coloring. Sibghat Allah. Meaning that merely handling it, mere exposure to it will change the fabric of a person's being indefinitely. It can never go back to the way it was before. Once a person has internalized or heard the concepts of the Quran, they will either get better or worse. There is no being the same after crossing its river. And so, because of this, many of us shy away from the Quran. Because it's intrusive. We understand how intrusive it is. It goes into the deepest, most intimate parts of our soul, our mind, our body, our households, our manners, the way we think, and it changes. And we are, as human beings, a species who really dislike change. We don't like it. It scares us. And so we choose to ignore the Quran, and we do different ways to ignore it, right? And we will discuss some of these ways after discussing this parable of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this verse with Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. Now, we're not speaking about the light that we perceive with our eyes, right? This light that we perceive with our eyes is from the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, what's meant is Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. He is the provider of that physical light. And He subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider and the source of that spiritual, metaphorical light. The light that a person's eyes perceive, and the light that a person's enlightenment or a person's insight perceives. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of all of that. Then He gives an example of this light. He says, مَثَلُ نُورِهِ, the parable of His light. What's meant here by His light is His guidance. And we understand that from the context. This is what Imam al-Tabari, rahimahullah, in his tafsir, he mentions that the context alludes to the fact that what is meant by the light of Allah here is the guidance of Allah. Because at the end of the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, at the end of the verses, there's a string of parables. At the end of them, He says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَجْعَلِ اللَّهُ لَهُ نُورًا فَمَا لَهُ مِن نُور. And whomever Allah does not provide light to, he cannot have any light. He has no way of achieving any light. What's meant here is guidance. Here in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the parable of His light, His guidance. كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِيهَا مِصْبَاحٌ. Al-mishkah, in the Arabic language, is al-kuwa. Al-kuwa is a niche, right? A long time ago, we didn't have fancy lights that were in the ceiling. Lights were placed in the walls. You would have a niche in the wall. It looks like a window, but it's not actually a window. It's just a carve out in the wall. And they would, paint it maybe with ceramic they would have in it, or paint it with some white paint or something that would be reflective of the light, and they would put a candle or they would put some source of light in this niche, and it would reflect the light out. This is how they lit everything. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَثَلُ نُورِهِ كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِيهَا مُصْبَاحٌ, is like a niche in which there is a lantern, there is a wick burning. This wick here is a representation of the belief and the fitrah of Allah in the heart of the believer. And we'll discuss why that is. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, كَمِشْكَاتٍ فِيهَا مِصْبَاحٌ الْمِصْبَاحُ فِي زُجَاجَةٍ. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions in expressing the power of this parable, he says, what's meant here by the niche is the chest of the believer. And what's meant by the musbah, the actual wick that is burning, the lantern, is the light of belief and the fitrah of the human being, the believer. He says, al-misbahu fi zujaja. This wick is surrounded and encapsulated in glass. This glass here is a reference to the heart of the believer. There's a narration reported by Al-Tabarani in Al-Mu'jam Al-Kabir on the authority of Abi Inba Al-Khawlani radiyallahu anhu. This is a man that was born in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but never met him. This is what is referred to in the science of hadith as al-mukhadram. Al-Mukhadram means that he was born in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He believed in him, but he didn't ever meet him. He's a Mukhadram. But he was a good, close friend of Mu'adh ibn Jabal. So we are almost positive that he took this from Mu'adh ibn Jabal. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Al-qulubu أواني الله أو آنية الله في أرضه وأحبها إلى الله أرقها وأصفاها وأصلبها. He said that the vessels of Allah in the earth are the hearts of the human beings. The most beloved of these vessels to Allah, to fill with His light, to fill with His with His revelation, subhanahu wa ta'ala. The most beloved of these vessels that He chooses to fill with His revelations are those hearts which are the most thin, the most clear, and the most strong. Notice here how he compares the glass vessel to the heart of the human being. It is thin, meaning it is intimate. It is merciful. But it is as well the heart of the believer that Allah loves is also as well hard. It is durable. Right? Because there are times when the human being has to be durable, has to be strong. In war, in opposition, in conflict. And we are surrounded by conflict. And from conflict is bred progress. He says, وَأَصْفَاهَا. And also the most beloved of hearts to Allah are those which are clearest. Because that glass which is clearest will present the world in the clearest picture. It is an unadulterated image of reality that is not clouded by emotion and clouded by misconceptions and presuppositions, etc. And so Allah mentions that the parable of His light, meaning His guidance in the heart of the believer, is like a niche, the chest here, in which there is a burning wick. This is the belief of the human being. This is the fitrah. He says, Al-Musbahu fi zujaja. That this burning candle, this wick, is burning, surrounded, enveloped, enclosed in a glass. Az-zujaja, now he describes the glass. Az-zujaja ka'annaha kawkabun durri. He says this glass is so profound that it is like a pearly white star that is shining. He says, Kawkabun durri. Durri nisbatun ila dur. A dur are pearls, right? Durri, meaning that it is pearly white. But there is another recitation for this verse as well, sab'iyya, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كأنها كوكب دريء. It is as if this glass is a penetrating light of a star. Penetrating light, meaning that من الدر is to is a dar in the Arabic language is to cause something to recluse. And so the light of the belief is pure in itself, and it is something that runs away and causes the darkness to recluse and retreat. يوقد من شجرة مباركة وفي قراءة يوقد من شجرة مباركة. This wick now, it is fed and fueled from the oil of a tree that is blessed. Now this here is a parable of the Quran, the revelations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says that this revelation is like that of a pure oil that comes from a blessed tree. He identifies this oil as zaytuna, an olive tree. La sharqiyatin wala gharbiyya. It is neither eastern nor western. Eastern or western meaning that if it is in the farthest east of the orchard, it will get a lot of the morning sun, but it will be deprived of the evening sun. Right? And if it is of the far west orchard, a tree of the far west part of the orchard, it will get a lot of the evening sun, but it won't really get a lot of the morning sun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that this tree is a tree that is balanced. It is neither eastern nor western. It is bathed in sunlight as long as the sun is up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَكَادُ زَيْتُهَا يُضِيءُ وَلَوْ لَمْ تَمْسَسْهُ نَارٌ. That the oil of this tree is so potent, it is so profound and so combustible that it is almost a light before the ignition, the fire is even introduced to it. This is an example of the Quran, how profound the Quran is, how moving the Quran is, how potent its guidance is. So potent that it is almost in motion before it even reaches the human heart. And that is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name is Al-Hayy, the ever-living subhanahu wa ta'ala. He epitomized to us His description of life by negating anything that would be in opposition to life. He says, Allahu la ilaha illahu al-hayyul qayyum la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. He is Al-Hayy, the one who is ever living, and no slumber nor sleep subdue him. Slumber, a sinna, is the beginning parts of sleep. When a person starts feeling drowsy and they start to slip into sleep, this is a sinna. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He affirmed for us here that He is the ever-living Al-Hayy, and He negated the least of its opposites, which is a sinna, wa nawm. Because death is the opposite of life, and sleep is a type of death. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam a question. He asked him, saying, Ahlul Jannah yanamun, do the people of paradise sleep? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded, saying, Ahlul Jannah an-nawmu akhul maut wa ahlul Jannah la yamutun. He said that sleeping is a type of death, and the people of paradise do not die. And so, being that Allah's description is Al-Hayy, this description presents itself in His book, the Quran. Because the Quran is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, when the Quran, being that the Quran is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran itself has a portion of that description of life. It is interactive. This Quran, it is not confined by any time or place or situation. It applies to everything and everyone. It's just vague enough to apply to everyone, yet it is specific enough to guide everyone specifically in his or her individual path. This is profound. that it can be vague enough to apply to every single one of us individually. And we can read the Quran and find our exact description in the Quran, each one of us. If we look hard enough, we are there. We are mentioned exactly. My description, my tendencies, whatever they are, there is a piece of me there. Yet it is specific enough to where it will provide me individualized, tailor-fashioned guidance to lead me from darkness to light. And it will provide this one and that one the exact same kind of guidance, regardless of his or her circumstances. And this is a reflection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's haya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in this verse that the Quran يَكَادُ زَيْتُهَا يُضِيءُ وَلَوْ لَمْ تَمْسَسْهُ نَارٌ. The Quran here, this revelation, the parable here of this potent, combustible, highly flammable fuel for the belief and fitrah of the human being, which is the revelation, which is given an example here of this olive oil. It is almost ignited. It is almost alight without being introduced to an ignition. He then says, Nurun ala nur. Light upon light. Meaning the light of the human being's belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Light of a person's sound intellect. Light of a person's sound logic that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed in the human being. And the light of the revelations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The light of this olive oil and the light of that ignition, of that candle or that lit wick. This is the example of the Quran, that it is very potent. And this is why we mentioned at the beginning that if an individual reads the Quran or hears the Quran, even if it's just one verse, this person will never be the same individual that they were before they heard or read or were exposed to that verse. Impossible. Because it is too potent. The human being was tailor-made and fashioned to receive this Quran. And so when it comes in contact, it becomes combustible. It changes. But people, they are very arrogant and they're stuck in their ways. And you can fight against the light. A person will never be the same, but they will always change every time they interact with the miracles of Allah, with the Quran namely. But some people will change for the better, and some people will change for the worst, unfortunately. But either way, everyone will change. No one will remain the same after experiencing the Quran. And this shows us how profound the Quran was. It kind of reminds me of a few instances in which the people were moved by the Quran. It's mentioned in Sahih Muslim on the authority of Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu that when Surah An-Najm was revealed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca, that he was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to recite it upon the nobility of Quraysh. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam went to a gathering of the nobility of Quraysh. Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab and all these different characters that were there. And he went to this gathering and he recited to them Surah An-Najm. Now, Surah An-Najm at the end has a sajda, right? This sajda is one of the 15 sajdas in the Quran. It's a difference of opinion amongst the fuqaha where they are exactly. But in Surah An-Najm, there is a sajda at the very end, in the very last verse. The Prophet ﷺ, when he went to Quraysh, these nobility of Quraysh, his most vehement antagonists, when he went to them, he recited to them Surah An-Najm. Now, Surah An-Najm is not a particularly flattering chapter of the Quran to his opposition. As a matter of fact, his enemies, and that's his antagonists, their individual gods were named and insulted in the beginning of this chapter. He said, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى لَكُمُ. He mentions these most renowned gods of the mushrikeen in an insulting, demeaning way. They were very offended by this chapter. It was one of the chapters of the Quran that was revealed when after the smiles had all faded between the Muslims and the non-Muslims. Now they were being tortured and persecuted and so forth. And so, kind of like the gloves were coming off now. And the opposition was becoming more and more clear. And so it's not a particularly flattering chapter of the Quran when it mentions the mushrikeen and his antagonists. Yet in spite of this, he had the courage, he had the bravery to go to their gathering and recite to them Surah An-Najm. And when he recited Surah An-Najm and he reached the end, it was so compelling, so captivating, that he made sujood, and the mushrikeen forgot themselves and they all made sujood with him. This is how compelling these verses of the Quran were. That they forgot themselves. They were so enthralled that when they heard that they are to make sujood, and he made sujood, they all made sujood with him. Right? And then they caught themselves. But a rumor nonetheless started to spread amongst the mushrikeen that everybody in Mecca became Muslim. We all saw them making sujood with Muhammad. Yet after this, what happened? They upped the ante. They became even more antagonizing. But as we notice here, the Quran was so compelling, so enthralling, that they were changed. Most of them changed for the worse, but they were changed nonetheless. And this is how they used to see the Quran. They were afraid of it. The mushrikeen, they used to hide their children at night so that they wouldn't hear the Prophet ﷺ reciting the Quran. And we'll end with this here, that the mushrikeen, they were in opposition of the Quran, but they really liked it at the same time. Right? They admired it, but they hated its implications. And Ibn Ishaq mentions in his book As-Sirah that three of the mushrikeen, Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan and Al-Akhnas ibn Shuraiq, these three men at the time were the heads of the mushrikeen in Quraysh, that they used to sneak out at night and listen to the Quran. This is a true story. So the Prophet ﷺ would go to Mecca, he was in Mecca, he would go to the Kaaba, right? And he would pray at night, and he would recite the Quran. And so these mushrikeen, they would come and they would hide around the Kaaba. Some of them would hide between the Kaaba and the cover. Some of them would hide, and they would listen to the Prophet ﷺ recite the Quran until Fajr. I've met few Muslims that listen to the Quran until Fajr. These men would sit around the Kaaba and listen to him in secret until Fajr. And in this particular incident, these three men, Abu Jahl and Abu Sufyan, and when they saw the sun was starting to rise, they all started to sneak home again, and they jama'athum al-tariq, as the narration mentions. they all met in the same way, and each one was saying, what are you doing here? I didn't know, what are you doing here? And so they all realized that, okay, look, we were cheating, okay? We were listening. We shouldn't have been doing this. They said to each other, if the young men of Quraysh know about this, this will be a fitna for them to know that we're out here listening to the Quran. They can't handle this. We can handle it. So they all decided, look, we promise 100%. They each gave their oath. They would never, ever do this again. And so the next night came, each one thinking the other would hold true to his promise. Right? So they all did the same thing. ثُمَّ جَمَعَتْهُمُ الطَّرِيقِ. Again, they met in the street going home. Again, I thought we talked about this, right? Each one blaming the other. They again said, no, last time, we slipped up, never again. Again, the next night, each one thinking for sure the other isn't going to come. And again, جَمَعَتْهُمُ الطَّرِيقِ. Al-Akhnas ibn Shuraiq later became Muslim. Abu Sufyan later became Muslim. The only one of these three in this story that didn't become Muslim was Abu Jahl. Al-Akhnas ibn Shuraiq decided, let's address the elephant in the room, right? Let's just talk about this. So he decided that morning, he went to Abu Sufyan in his house, and he said, look, no point in playing anymore and denying it. We all heard it. What do you really think about it? What do you really think about this book he's reciting? And so Abu Sufyan said, there are parts of it that I understand and are clear to me and are profound and I agree with, and there are other parts that I don't understand and are unclear to me. And they both kind of agreed that yes, this is only a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-Akhnas decided to go to Abu Jahl, and he asked him the same question. What do you think about what we heard last night and the night before? Abu Jahl said, what do I think about it? He said, this is a man who comes from a tribe, Bani Hashim, that we were constantly competing with all our lives. They would give charity, we would give charity. They're known for their generosity, we would up it and be known for our generosity. They would be known for their strength and courage and valor, and we the same. And then after all this struggle and conflict, like two racehorses, almost to the finish line, all of a sudden they have a prophet whom revelation comes to from Allah. Where now are we going to get a prophet to compete with them? He said, Wallahi, we will never believe in this and we will never follow Muhammad. And so the point here is that we are taking the Quran very lightly, a lot of us. It's not as serious as it should be. And the reason for that is that we are afraid of the changes and implications it brings. Just the same as Abu Jahl was afraid of the changes and implications of the book. Yet in order for a person to grow, to metamorphosize, to change, the individual has to embrace the revelation. He has to go where the revelation takes him. He can't be stubborn. He has to embrace. And when the individual embraces, as we mentioned at first, it will be very difficult. It will be strenuous. Just like when the revelation first came to the Prophet ﷺ, and Jibreel said to him, "Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq." He didn't have a good time. He was very scared and frightened and shocked. And it took him a few days to calm down again. But an individual has to go through this change. And the only way to do so is to embrace the Quran. What does that mean, embrace the Quran? That when a person reads it, he doesn't read over it. A person goes through the Quran and experiences it. fathoms its power, bathes in its fountain of wisdom, that the individual witness and imagine its beauty, and that when an individual embraces the Quran in this way, and is not hasty, and has good intentions, the Quran will make the best of this person. And a person will have no choice but to change for the better. And the person will change body, mind, and spirit simultaneously with the Quran. And that an individual who does this may lose some things along the way. This is what we're afraid of when we follow the Quran. We're afraid of losing those friends. We're afraid of losing those habits. We're afraid of the nostalgia and all these other things that we are going to have to shed on our path. And through our metamorphosis, we have to shed these things. But when we embrace the revelation, yes, we will shed a lot of things. We will lose a lot of familiar things and habits that, pacify us. But we will gain a knowledge of Allah that is so vivid, so deep, so personal, that we will not even be able to describe it anymore. It's something that can only be felt and experienced. The Quran, this is the spoken words of Allah. And every single verse is a description and a color, and it is a description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every single verse. And that when a person familiarizes himself with the Quran, he will come to know Allah in a way that exceeds and transcends verbal descriptions. It's something that can only be experienced after this. Something that can only be felt. And we will end with this, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this experience with regards to the people of the book. He said, الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-An'am, what we're speaking about here is in Surah Al-An'am. That they know the book as well as they know their own children. And as we've mentioned before, this description is very particular. Anyone who has children understands this. That if I were to sit here and describe to you day in and day out my children, describe them, how they look, how they act, what they say, what they've said, and all of that, you would never know my children like I know my children. Never. No matter how vivid my description is. Because that is a knowledge that is so intimate that it has to be experienced. That's the only way you can feel it. And that is what the Quran was meant to do. It was meant to come to the human being, to enter into the most deepest, darkest parts of our heart, shed light on everything that we're afraid of, and to bring out the best in us. And if we allow it, what I mean by allow it is, we embrace it. We say, take me where I'm supposed to go. Right? If we have that courage to take that step, it will not be an easy process, but it will definitely be a worthwhile one. So I think that's enough for tonight. I think that we're supposed to have questions or something. I'm sure I went over my time. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.
All right, Jazakallah khair, Shaykh Ali. May Allah allow us to connect with, benefit from, and embrace the Quran and its teachings. Does anyone have any questions for Shaykh Ali? All right, I'll start with brother here in the front. Go for it.
You said that the Quran, when someone experiences it, they may change for the better or the worse.
All right.
What do you mean by for the worse?
If a person rejects it, they will change, but they will change for the worst. This is the nature of light. This is why Allah describes light oftentimes. The Quran is light. If you stand behind the light, it will show you. If you face the light, it will blind you. Right.
questions? Any from the sister side? All right, we'll bounce back to the brothers.
Am I too intimidating for people to ask questions, or am I so thorough that nobody has any questions?
In the back.
So, it's narrated on the Prophet ﷺ, Ahlul Quran, Ahlullah, Khassateh. How do we become of that category?
Ahlullah wa khassatu. This narration is collected by Nasa'i, the authority of Anas. It's an authentic narration. It's a very profound narration that Inna lillahi ahlin min khalqih, that Allah has close ones and victors of His creation. And the people of the Quran, they are Ahlullah wa khassatu. They are His particular, they are His closest. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions regarding this narration that in order for a person to become min Ahlillah, they are those who implement and practice the teachings of the Quran even if they haven't memorized it. Meaning, in order for a person to be considered of Ahlullah, an individual must hold to the teachings of the Quran even if they don't know them by heart. Right. This is how a person is from Ahlullah. They exalt Allah by exalting the Quran. Right. Allahu A'lam.
Other questions? Okay, I got one on the left. Go for it.
I had two questions.
Two questions.
The first question is, you say that a believer's heart should be thin but strong.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of smiling because this reminds me of 1990s like Oprah show and stuff where they bring out the mic. Like it's not bad, it's not good, it's not bad, it's just an observation. Yes. Remind me of daytime TV. Yes. I mean, not you, but okay, I'm sorry. I'm digging a deeper hole for myself. Go ahead.
So you say that a believer's heart should be thin but strong.
Right.
Besides reading the Quran, what are other ways to achieve a heart of the believer like that?
One of the greatest ways is showing mercy to people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about that man that was given that special knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so particular that even Musa alayhi salam didn't have it and he had to travel to get it. Al-Khadr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِّنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. That he was given mercy from Allah and he was taught a knowledge directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the greatest ways a person can attain knowledge, one of the greatest ways a person can become enlightened and have that what's meant by thin here, that very interactive, sensitive heart, right, is for an individual to show mercy to other people, to be merciful to people. Second of all, to be humble. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, the great Imam of Islam, the great Faqih and Khalifa, he said that the lowest parts of the earth collect the most water, and that the most humble of students have the most knowledge, collect the most knowledge, just like the lowest parts of the earth collect the most water, most rainwater. So a person must humble himself. Some people, they learn a lot of facts, but they don't learn a lot of knowledge. So they can sit here and shoot off all kinds of fancy facts, but there's a difference between facts and knowledge, right? Knowledge is what Imam Malik mentioned. It is a light that Allah places in the heart, right?
And my last question is, what's your number one tip for anyone who's trying to memorize the Quran on their own?
Memorize the Quran on your own. First of all, don't start from the beginning. That's what I did, and I learned the hard way that that's not the way you should start. I finished finally, but that's not the way that you should start. You start at the back. not just because the chapters are shorter and the verses are shorter, but because the knowledge in that place is more important and more pertinent to the individual than what's at the front of the Quran. That's number one. Number two, you need to do it every day from the same mushaf, right? Same print. Number three, you should do it either when you just wake up or right before you go to bed. I personally found the best time for me to memorize anything is before I go to bed. Because, I lay down and, you're getting ready to go to sleep. You take in the information, you let it rattle around in your mind, and you fall asleep thinking about it. Right? And sometimes you'll even dream about it. And this is important. This is the process. Right? Number four, revision, revision, revision. I don't even remember. I remember one time you could forget anything, subhanAllah. And, one of my sheikhs that I recited to and learned the recitation of the Quran from, whenever I would recite to him and I would make a mistake in something that otherwise I wouldn't make a mistake in, he would tell me, this is the Quran. It will bring any person to his knees. It's a very complicated book. You're never going to be over the Quran. It will always be over you, right? And so an individual has to always constantly revise the Quran. And we're not talking about just fly-by-night revision. We're talking about revision with the heart and mind present. Finally, to investigate its meanings. This is very important. Because then, once you understand it, it becomes personal. Very, very difficult to forget something that's personalized. Yes. Allahu a'lam. There's other tips. There's books written about it and stuff, but that's what I can think of. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. That was you to say yes. Okay. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You mentioned about basically when you're in the Quran, actually, you say basically you lose your bad habits, things like that, which I understand. But why would you, let's say, lose friends? You said, if I remember correctly.
I said that. That's important for us to know, because on our path of the Quran, there's going to come a time when we cannot tread that path with certain people anymore. Ibn al-Qayyim mentioned, rahimahullah, either in Al-Risala al-Tabukiyya or in Tariq al-Hijratain, very similar. He mentions that as a person takes his path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, along that path he will start seeing his friends and people that are with him go off the path. And finally he will end up by himself and realize that all of his true friends are dead. And what he means by that is, your true companions are the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, this is a difficult process. You understand? Because people change. We're all constantly changing. And just as our habits are going to change, people that condone those habits are also going to change. It will happen. It happened to the prophets. Once they go through certain levels of changes, even their father, even their children, their wives, they have to part ways. Right? Yeah. Doesn't mean that in order to change I have to, become some recluse and just... That's not what's meant. What's meant is this will gradually, naturally happen. And it's difficult when it happens. But it's necessary. Well, yeah.
Got a question on the left from Scissors?
Yeah, so in terms of contemplation, how can you affirm that the personalized messages that you feel are grounded in the real meaning?
There are parts of the Quran that everybody understands. Right? You're more speaking about the nuances. Those nuances, those details come with knowledge. They come with time and experience. Don't jump the gun. There are parts of the Quran that no two people will argue about. When you read the Quran, you're going to understand. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. He's the only one worthy of worship. Zina is haram. Riba is haram. Salah is wajib. Fasting is obligatory. You understand? Those nuances, those details, They will only come with experience and exposure to the people who understood the book before us. If you imagine with me, for example, a picture, right? Let's say a work of art. Let me say, for example, the Mona Lisa. When I say the Mona Lisa, everybody has the same lady pop into their mind, right? So we all know that when we look at this picture, we all see the same thing, right? You cannot mistake it. You cannot mistake the gender of the person. You cannot mistake But in order to learn more about it, that theme that everyone understands, to the Quran, that is Surah Al-Fatiha. That's why it starts with Surah Al-Fatiha. You understand the rest of the message by understanding Surah Al-Fatiha. Everything in the Quran, Ibn al-Qayyim says, in Ad-Dawa' al-Shafi and Madarij al-Salikin, he mentions, rahimahullah, that the entire Quran is an explanation of Surah Al-Fatiha. And he mentions that the entire Quran is an explanation of Iyyaka na'bud wa Iyyaka nasta'in. This is the Quran. It's just elaborating on Surah Al-Fatiha. So the theme of the Quran is Surah Al-Fatiha. You cannot miss that. Right? Some people have managed to miss it, but you can't miss that. That's the theme. But now when you want to learn more about the Quran, or our proverbial Mona Lisa, you're going to start coming in closer. Now you want to learn more. Who painted this? Okay, Leonardo da Vinci. What era did he live in? Who is this depicting? We come closer and closer. Then we start with the microscopes and the magnifying glasses, and that comes with experience. It comes with knowledge. That doesn't come by itself. I may have certain presuppositions about it, and they may be right or they may be wrong based on my expertise. But that has to come through research and understanding those nuances. But the theme of the Quran, you cannot mistake it. It's impossible, right? Even if you tried, you can't mistake it. You understand? I hope that answered your question. Right.
Cool. Thanks. Any other questions? Go ahead.
Okay, so for someone who doesn't read as much Quran as they would like to, would you recommend starting from the beginning or the end, or like opening up a random chapter or a random page?
No, to read the Quran, begin as it is set. Start with Surah Al-Fatiha and read through. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is not to jump to any conclusions in reading the Quran. You have to have a level of humility in dealing with the Quran. That I am a human being, I will not understand everything in this book. Not on the first go, not on the 100th go. That's just the way it works. That humility is necessary, right? The average human brain is about 3 pounds, right? You can't really do that much with 3 pounds. You're not going to figure out the cosmos. You're not going to answer all of life's big questions. It's just not going to happen. You have to understand your limitations, right? That humility is necessary. Second of all, it has to be in the pretext of الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ. You cannot approach it in an empirical, materialistic way. This is going to have to make sense from A to Z in every way that I know reality to be. It won't work. You have to have a level of faith, belief. You have to give yourself away in that way. And you have to have a level of humility. When you start to read the Quran, you begin from the beginning. And you go with it one verse at a time. Right? The best translation of the Quran that I know of is Sahih International. I've read a lot. And you know, some of them are very eloquent but wrong, and some of them are very accurate, but they are very choppy and very difficult and laborsome to read. Okay? Some are written in very archaic English, like Pictal and Yusuf Ali, you know. These are written yay and nay, and you know, we don't speak that way anymore, and most people can't understand. It was meant to be profound, but that's not how we speak anymore. Sahih International, a lot of people like to tend towards the Noble Quran, but what a lot of people don't know is the Noble Quran is a revision of the Holy Quran by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. It's the same book, it's just edited. And Abdullah Yusuf Ali is highly edited. Very rarely can you find the original text that Abdullah Yusuf Ali wrote in the 1800s. Okay? The Holy Quran is okay, but it has mistakes in it, clearly. And it's very eloquent. My personal favorite, eloquence-wise, is Pictal. It's very nice. It was written in the 1800s, and it was the first go. So there are mistakes. But Sahih International is a group of English-speaking Americans that got together in the 90s and translated the Quran from the beginning to the end. That's my personal favorite. It flows very well. It's very fluid. And so I would advise that, and it's very accurate too, you know. So I would advise that you begin with Sahih International. You want to read the Quran and understand it, begin with reading the Quran, and every single verse that you come across, you put it into the context of Surah Al-Fatiha. That's number one. Number two, you want to learn a little bit more, acquaint yourself with the story of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whether it be the sealed nectar or what are some other ones that people like, right? What is it? Martin Ling's is okay. It's got some mistakes in it, but it's very eloquent, right? It's written very nice. The man was very passionate, right? It's got some things. Tariq Ramadan, right? You know, take from here and there with a pinch of salt or a grain of salt, right? Martin Ling's is very good, but not everything in it is accurate, right? Like, for example, in the beginning he mentions that Ismail was buried next to the Kaaba. That's not correct, right? But it's okay. The majority of the work is very good. Martin Ling's is very good. Don't hang on to the details, but take the overall overarching. When the Moon Split is a summarization of the sealed nectar. Is very good as well. Acquaint yourself with that story very well to where you can mentally go through. After that, the Quran will present itself to you in a whole different context. If you want to learn even more, now you're going to have to get into Arabic language, right? Because after that, you're now going to a level that is just the limitations of English. There's only so much you can do with a translation. Allahu a'lam.